I'm Beverly Noel Long. I was born in Preston, a suburb of Melbourne, in 11th of November 1933. I'm now 79, so my memories are a bit vague.
Yes, I'm William Francis Long. I was born in Kew at St George's Private Hospital. We lived in North Melbourne for quite a few years with my two brothers and sister.
I went to school at West Preston State School and then on to Coburg High. I started school when I was 4 because that was when my father died, and they took me at school because he was allowed home from hospital as long as we children weren't in the house. So they took me at school but didn't put me on the roll till I was a year older. I went to high school till I was at year 10, did quite well. I was dux of the primary school, but average in high school, but I did okay.
I went to school at St Michael's Catholic School in North Melbourne, and I was dux of that school when I left there. I went down to St Joseph's Technical College in Abbotsford then, did a junior merit certificate, or junior technical certificate there. At St Michael's we did the merit certificate. Teaching's changed altogether now.
My first job was working at the gas company as a clerk. My second job, I'd done a business course at school, and I was a secretary for a firm called Hawker Richardson, and I worked there till after my first son was born. And I've only had 2 jobs, and the next job I worked part-time at The Age, taking classified ads over the phone. My work's always been typing, but that was typewriters, not computers.
I started work at HB Selby and Company, who were chemical distributors and scientific apparatus. I was studying at Melbourne Tech College 4 nights a week as a chemical scientist. But after 4 nights a week, 18 months of that, I gave it up. It was too much. It was 4 nights a week, 4 hours a night. I went from there down to a place in Elizabeth Street where I was a storeman driver. I had to look after the store and also deliver the goods to places around the city. And then we got refrigerators down from Queensland called Airstream refrigerators, and I had to deliver them. I had to deliver them by myself, and some of them were upstairs, and it was pretty hard getting them up there. But I didn't have any accidents with them. And a kerosene burner in the bottom of the refrigerator, and if they didn't freeze up, we had to go out and service them. And the best way to service them was to turn them upside down for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then turn them back up again, put the light under them, and they worked. And I got a trip up to Horsham one week because there were a couple up there that weren't working. And I went up there and turned them upside down and got them working. So that was okay. And then I went from there to a used car dealership just across the road in Elizabeth Street. And I got a 5-day trip out of that, going around the countryside trying to buy cars. But there were no cars available, and the chap I was with, we had a 5-day holiday on the firm. Yeah, well, after the used car dealership, a mate of mine, Frank Dangerville, he joined the ambulance service. And I was talking to him one day and he said, why don't you join up? I thought, well, that's not bad. So I went and applied for a job with the Victorian Civil Ambulance Service, as it was then. And the head mechanic took me for a driving test. Came back, he said, okay, you'll do. And I started with the ambulance service. I think we were paid 10 and sixpence a week then. That's about $1.05. No medical, no nothing there. We just did a first aid course one night a week at headquarters, which was virtually a St John's ambulance certificate. But the day you started, you went out on the road first up. You always put with a senior man then, to gain experience. I worked my way up in the ambulance service to a district officer in Vic Civil. It changed its name from Victorian Civil Ambulance Service to Ambulance Service Melbourne, Metropolitan Ambulance Service. And then I applied for a job up in Shepparton as a deputy, and I was successful with that, and I finished up retiring from Shepparton as deputy superintendent. It's 37 years in the ambulance service. My first car was a Morris Cowley. I used to start it up of a morning, and it had 3 cast iron cylinders and 1 aluminium cylinder in it. When I first started it up, it knocked like blazes. I used to have to rev the guts out of it, get rid of the knock. But that was all right. I was driving to work one day and went to go round a little bit of a bend in the road, and the car went straight ahead. The steering rod had dropped off because it had come undone. Split pin had dropped out and the nut had come undone. And I hit a tree guard in the middle of the road. So that was all right. The second car was a Chev single-seater with a dicky seat, and that went well. And I traded that in and got a Morris Minor. That was about 1956 or something, I think it was.
Just before we were married, wasn't it, or was it just after?
No, before we were married, I think. And a couple of years later, I traded that in and got a later model Morris Minor. The motorbikes I had, one was a Rudge, with a flat petrol tank. It wasn't a bad bike either. That's an early model. The Rudge was wooden stone top gear, that's right. I pulled the gearbox to pieces one day and there's ball bearings and roller bearings and tapered roller bearings went everywhere. And I finished up taking it into Rudge agent in Elizabeth Street and in a cardboard box and asking him to put it back together again. It still didn't stay in top gear. The other bike I had was an AJS. Now that was a flat tank, and that used to go well. And a mate of mine, Dermot Bevan,
Yeah.
Dermot Bevan, used to go out for a ride on it, and we used to travel all around the place on that bike. I didn't have a licence at all. When I got my licence, I sold the bikes. Never rode a bike since.
We met at Rosebud when we were on holidays. We used to go down for a fortnight every year and rent a place at Rosebud, and Bill's family and Vic's family used to camp on the foreshore down there, and Pat met her husband down there and I met Bill down there. We started to go out together when I was 15, and as history says, we've been together ever since. I've never looked at another fella, so we must have had something going for him.
It wasn't my money.
No, or your good looks.
No, true.
We got a caravan ourselves years later, and we still used to spend our holidays down there. Bill would take us down for a month in the summer holidays and go back to work, and I would stay there with the kids. And I had an aunt and uncle who had a house in Macrae, who had a boat shed on the foreshore, and we could take our Tony's boat, skiffle boards, big beach towels, all our beach rubbish down, that we didn't have to cart it backwards and forwards every day and just leave it in the boathouse. It made for very easy, lovely holidays, and Bill would come down every weekend to be with us. The other school holidays we used to travel somewhere with our caravan, but we always spent the summer at Macrae for many years.
We got married at St Patrick's Cathedral in Melbourne. What was
How
it?
old were you?
1955, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. I was 22 in 1 week.
I must have been about 26 or something. I think 26. We had a caravan honeymoon. Went over to Mount Gambier.
Bill's father had a caravan, and it had, under the front seat, it had a big tin bath in it. You don't see that in caravans these days. You pull into a caravan park, but the caravan we went away and had this great big huge tin bath in it. We've taken our caravan to Queensland a couple of times. Never been higher up than, well, I've been to Bundaberg now, but in our caravan we never went much higher up than the Gold Coast. Went into Brisbane a couple of times. But we had some good times in it. We've been lots of nice holidays.
I'll never forget Mum and Dad when we lived in North Melbourne. We were building a holiday home down at Macrae, and we used to take a trailer load of building materials down of a Friday night for the weekend, come back Sunday night. And one Friday evening, Dad went to start the car and it wouldn't start. It just went round and come up thump. And I had to listen to it. I said, blown a head gasket, Dad. The piston was full of water, and that's what caused the piston to come up with a thump. So we shot into town and bought a new head gasket. While he was doing that, I pulled it apart and came back, put the head gasket on, tightened everything up, started the car, away it went like a sewing machine. And we drove down to Macrae. And on the way down, every now and then, Dad would say, "The trailer's still there?" And I'd be sitting in the back seat, and I'd look out through the back window and say, "Yeah, still there." When we got down to Macrae, the road up to where we were building was pretty rough. It's fairly deep,
Steep, yeah.
ridges in it, water runoffs and that. We're going up there and hit one bump. Dad says, "The trailer's still there?" I looked around and I said, "Yeah, no, it's not." We only had a tow bar with a hole through it, and a bolt that went down through the tow bar of the trailer and down through the hole in this trailer, and the bolt had jumped out. The trailer, of course, finished up down the road again. No damage done, but we just hooked it on and went on our way up to the top. Yeah, well, Mum was born in Australia. Dad was English. Dad was born in Fulham. He joined the Navy, the Royal Navy, as a boy seaman. at the age of about 14. He spent the First World War in the Navy, in the RN, and then he transferred to the RAN about, I don't know, in the 1920s, I think it was. I don't know whether he'd met Mum before that or after he transferred to the RAN. But they were married in 1928.
28.
I was born in 1929. And when the Second World War broke out, Dad was called up again because he always reserved in the Navy. Dad was called up, and we were living in Melbourne tonight at that time. And of course he was sent up to Sydney, which is typical. Anyways, he was posted to HMAS Sydney. And then just not long before she sailed on her last voyage, he was discharged, medically unfit. So he was lucky in that respect, because the Sydney sailed and was lost. But Dad was discharged from the Navy, and he went to work at the Maribyrnong Armaments Depot in the naval part of it. And he used to go down and visit the warships when they came into Port Melbourne and see what ammunition and so forth was required. And he used to organise that for them. He met quite a few of his old mates down there when ships came in. Then he went from that and bought a farm down in Timboon. The dairy farm. And my younger brother Dennis went down there with them. And they used to do the morning milking. And then Dennis used to do the delivery of fresh milk around the city, around the town of Timboon. Beautiful milk it was, straight over the cooler. And none of this pasteurised stuff. But what was left over after the deliveries, they'd deliver to the butter factory, where it was turned into butter. And then Dad he got sick down there at the farm and finished up. He died. Mum sold the farm and moved up to Ballarat. Dennis married a girl from Timboon. He had a house on the farmland.
I have spent a fair bit of time in the kitchen and still do. Less now than I used to. But I spend a lot of my time doing cake decorating too. I learned cake decorating from a friend. Had lessons for a long, long time. And when we were shifting up here, this girl said to me, she said, when you get to Shepparton and go and meet my twin sister up there. She's gone up there and she's very lonely. And I did, and Jen and I became the best of friends. Jen's now passed on, but I still keep in touch with Nancy on birthdays and so forth, the one that taught me the cake decorating. I made very good friends of the pair of them, and yes, I did spend a lot of time in the kitchen. But I'll tell you a little bit about my early life. You kids don't realise how lucky you are with what you have these days. When I was little, I was in a one-parent family because my father died when I was 4. And money was very tight. Mum went back school teaching because that's what she'd done before she was married, and that gave her the hours and the holidays with us 3 kids at home all the time. But when she went back to school teaching, she got £3 a week, which is $6 these days. half of which went in rent, and the other half had to pay our light, our gas, our wood, as well as our clothes and our food and chemist supplies. Anything we had to come out of half of £3. So money was very tight and we couldn't get much. We never ever had toothpaste as kids. Now, I don't remember whether Mum couldn't afford it or whether it was simply not available during the war. But we all used to have our own little egg cups of salt and dip our toothbrushes in salt to clean our teeth, and it worked quite well. But I really don't know whether that was a money problem or a wartime problem, because during the war everything was rationed. Each family was given a ration book for linen and clothing. Food, you had a ration book for meat, for sugar, for butter, for tea, and you had to not only supply the cash for it, you also had to supply a coupon to say you were eligible to have £1 of butter this week or £1 for next week. Things weren't easy and just easy to go into a shop and buy like they are today. But I remember the grocer that my dad had worked for before he died was jailed for 3 months because he let one of his regular customers have £0.5 of butter when she didn't have the coupon for it. So things were very strict and very well controlled at the time. But you know, as well as coupons, money was pretty tight and food was tight. The supplies went to the servicemen overseas, and what was left home was the leftovers. You really couldn't just go and say, "Oh, I'll have 4 lamb chops tonight." You had to go and take what was in the shop and pay your coupons and that for it then. It wasn't an easy childhood, and I guess Bill remembers all that too, and the coupons and rationing and so forth. If Mum had a shilling left over, she would let us kids go to the pictures on a Saturday afternoon pictures, and it would cost us threepence each to get in, and then for the third threepence Pat would buy a vial of crumble bar and break it into 3, so you kids would have a whole vial of crumble bar and then some. We used to have a third of a vial of crumble occasionally on a Saturday afternoon at the pictures, and thought it was Christmas. For Christmas we always got a book. We used to have a comic through the year, and they put out an annual at the end of the year, and we always had an annual and a packet of chocolate money. And I don't remember that we got a lot of presents, but I suppose we did. I can remember one year we got a scooter between us that I suppose Mum paid off on the lay-by for quite a while, if the truth's known. But there was never much, but there was never a shortage either. We were always well fed, well cared for and looked after, and had a happy childhood. But it was different to the childhood that you kids have had. Vastly different to the childhood that my kids had. We never had much money when they were kids, but they were well cared for and looked after. Always got something that they needed come Christmas time and something that they wanted. My mum was born in Australia, and my grandparents, to my knowledge, were born in Australia too, but I don't really know. Both came from English parents. My great-grandmother was in the Salvation Army, and my grandmother was the last of a family of 11, and her father had died before she was born, and her mother, who was in the Salvation Army, was also a midwife. So my gran was actually brought up by her older brothers, because her mother was always out at someone's house minding the one that was having babies. A midwife would go and stay in the house for 3 weeks or so after your baby was born. So she was sort of never home. But Gran was close to us as kids. She was closest when we were young. I remember there were a lot of celebrations. There was a lot of dancing in the street. At that stage we were still living in a house in Preston. That the people that lived next door, their family were all in the war. Their daughter had gone away, and 2 sons were in the war, and there was a lot of celebrations and that in our street and that at the time. But we lived in a house which you kids might think is funny now, but we never had any hot water. There was no such thing as hot water in the kitchen or anything. We had to boil a kettle to make a cup of tea, or boil a kettle to we had a gas stove and a wood stove, and we had to boil a kettle to wash the dishes, boil a kettle for a cuppa, and for a bath we had a chip heater to light with kindling, and a chip copper to do our washing, that we had to light these little fires. After we moved to Heidelberg, there was still no hot water in the kitchen, but we did have a gas copper, and eventually Mum put in a gas sink heater for hot water in the kitchen, and I think Vic installed for her a gas heater in the bathroom to heat up our bath water. And that, but these days you wouldn't, think of a house without hot water, but it was a carry job everywhere you wanted hot water. You'd have to boil your kettle and take it with you. But in Preston, where we lived, it was a chip heater, and we had I suppose you'd call it a scullery these days. The laundry had a chip heater down one end, then it had 2 cement troughs, and then there was a sink, which was a porcelain sink and wooden ends on it. And Mum would put Neil on one side and me on the other side, and get a couple of kettles of hot water and put in the sink bit to wash us. We didn't have a bath or a shower every day. It was too hard to get the hot water, but we used to get a wash down every day and our hair washed, but it was done in the sink in the scullery. We didn't have, of course we didn't have television to watch, we had a radio, but our evenings were spent, everybody had to put into the war effort. And Mum and Pat used to knit balaclavas and gloves for the soldiers, and Neil and I used to make camouflage nets, and they were made with a strong twine, I suppose it was. It wasn't thick like a rope, but it was sort of heavier than a string, and you had a big wooden needle, and they used to be hung on our back porch, and you'd go along and you'd make them row by row by row, and then move them up a row and go, and they were delivered back to the school, and the school disposed of them to wherever. I mean, all kids did it. You all made camouflage nets with your time. They were delivered back to the school, and they sent them to wherever they were needed. They supplied the materials, and Neil made the needles. They were these big needles with a hook up the middle that you had to wind your twine around it. And your camouflage nets were diamond holes about that size, and you had a knot here and a knot here and a knot here and a knot here that you used to thread them through with this needle. Did you ever do camouflage nets?
No.
No, I did from our school.
No, I used to have a trailer that hooked onto the back of my bike, and in the trailer was a rake, a shovel, and some sand, and water. And I used to trail that round North Melbourne in case there were ever any bombs dropped, so that I could put out incendiaries or fires or whatever. It's no lightweight, I can tell you, pulling that behind the bike.
Is that like an enlistment type thing from the school, or were you enlisted
No,
to do that?
it was just a voluntary thing, organised by the local council, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
We used to operate from behind the North Melbourne Town Hall. They used to have exercises in the backyard of the Town Hall of how to put out incendiaries and that sort of thing.
My mum had a cousin who was reasonably wealthy, and was the only place I ever knew that had an air raid shelter built in their backyard at Arnie Mays, and we would go there for lunch always in school holidays. We always had one day's lunch with Arnie May. We were allowed play in this air raid shelter, and it was stocked with tin foods and bottles of water and bedding and clothing. They were prepared if anything ever dropped close to them. But she also had a brother, Ron, who served he was actually a chef, and he served on the hospital ship Centaur, was on the ship when it was bombed, There was an agreement between countries that no one ever bombed a hospital ship, but the Centaur went up. But he was in the galley cooking. He was one of the very few survivors. He was blown up through the funnel when the ship was actually bombed. But not too many survived from that. There was hundreds killed.
I was just thinking through the war, Dad's family, of course, still lived in Fulham, and his brother Harry, one night, there was a raid on. He went outside for whatever reason, might have been to have a smoke or just have a look at it, whatever was going on. But all they found of him was his shoes after a bomb landed close by. So he was a casualty through the war. I don't know how his father or mother got on, I've got no idea. And Dad didn't know. I think he had, I'm not sure how many relatives he had. One brother at least anyway, Harry.
He had a sister too, didn't he?
I think he had a
He
sister,
had a
but
sister,
I can't...
Margaret, because that's who they named your Margaret after.
Was it?
After Dad's sister.
Margaret.
Yeah.
In fact, we didn't have gas for a while. Mum used to cook on a wood fire stove, and the bath and the laundry was outside. You come out the back door, and there was another door on the left, and that was the bathroom. And then alongside that was the laundry, and in the laundry was a copper. Well, you could buy coppers, which were 12 or 14 gallon, like a big dome, you know. And this was set into a brick surround. And we used to fill it with water, light a fire underneath it, and keep it going until the water got hot. Then we'd have to bucket the water from the copper round into the bathroom, tip it in the bath, and then we could have a bath. So you didn't have a shower, there were no showers, and you didn't bother having a bath every day because you couldn't be bothered.
No, we didn't either.
And not only that, none of this interior toilets in North. The place we were in was a narrow frontage. It was only about, it would have been, what, I don't know, 25, 30 feet across the front. It was about 200 feet down to the back. And the toilet was right down on the back
On the back
fence.
fence.
Dad got, one night, he got his overcoat, scarf, cap, gloves on. Mum said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Down to the toilet."
He's like
It was in
Jamil.
the window. You nearly needed to cut lunch to go to the toilet there.
Yes, you did. Try and live your dreams. Work hard. You'll gain nothing unless you're prepared to put in for what you get back. You've got to work hard to get what you want, but aim for your dreams.
Stay off the drugs.
Yeah, and the drink. And the drink.
It's all right to have a drink now and then, but don't go overboard. Everything in moderation.